start? Yes. Some people were not here on Monday, so I would like to give a brief introduction again. Professor Carroll Smith-Rosenberg, Mary Frances Berry, colleague, professor of history, American culture and women's studies, Emerita professor at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. She had made significant contributions both to the studies of the United States of women and gender history, and also developing interdisciplinary program and international scholarly network addressing women's history, gender studies, and the history of bisexuality. And also she had done a lot on cultural and Atlantic studies. And her groundbreaking article, The Female Word of Love and Rachel, established the legitimacy of lesbian history in the field. Her more recent book, The Violent Empire, The Birth of an American National Identity, won the Choice Award for Distinguished Scholarly Book in 2011. Her recent project, currently undergoing, is the examination of the historical trajectories of struggles for human rights and political agency. And in the talk she gave on Monday, Race, Rights, and Revolution, Democratic Enigma, Relentless Struggles, and the Modern Republic, she actually brought up a very important question, that is, all those revolutionary ideals during this age of revolution, including equality, liberty, and brotherhood, and also these human rights issues. She questioned how these original ideals were betrayed later on. Even it's betrayed in the constitutions of all nation states. And she brought up the idea that citizenship is a problem of all those issues of exclusionary distinction between citizens and the other migrants, stateless persons, and migrant workers. So, so she suggested that we should also need to reconsider how to democratize the borders, or to re-democratize democracy, and also to reconceptualize the right, okay, in both aspects. Today, she's going to talk about white slaves, black revolutionaries, who has the right to have right. We know that citizens, they have the right to have right, but who else? Okay, if it's non-citizens, if those are the people who don't have the same language, or some part of the citizens, they don't have the right to have right, then how do we address this issue? And also the title, who has the right to resist? So in this talk, she will cover the Haitian Revolution and the relation with the United States. And she will bring up the issue where the rebellious slaves in one of the most sadistic plantation slave economies, were they justified in their act in asserting their right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness? And did they embody the worst threat to democratic rule? And actually during last talk, we also mentioned the question concerning who and when does the violence of the revolution or resistance is legitimized. The legitimation of the revolutionaries' violence, or the law, executioners' right of violence. Okay, for example, the case of Hong Kong. So it's a pity that those students who were here concerning the Hong Kong case were not here, but we still can address these issues in our follow-up discussion after your talk. But shall we start? Let's welcome Professor Smith-Rosenberg together. Yes.
Well, as I said on Monday, I'm thrilled to be here. Among other reasons, it's forcing me to work on a project that I keep putting off. I'm ashamed to see how long I've been working on it. So this way I figured I have to really make strides to conclude it, and I even was working on my book proposal this morning. So I want to thank everyone for pushing me forward, but most especially Rada, who won't let me give up on this. So, white slaves, black revolutionaries. Liberal rights, democratic aspirations. Entwined, they constitute the foundational principles of political modernity, the norms against which we judge ourselves and our Republican governments. And I will repeat what I said on Monday. If you can't hear me, I think as I get older, my voice gets frailer. Annoyingly, one of the annoying pleasures of growing old. So if you can't hear me, please jump up and down, do a jig, somehow or other indicate to me that I am not coming over. Thank you. Now, what if, however, far from being harmonious, liberalism's individual rights and democracy's promises of equality and political agency, what if they battled one another? The democratic tradition celebrates equality and popular sovereignty, political critic Chantal Mouffe tells us, while the liberal tradition valorizes individual liberty and human rights. Two quite distinct political philosophies. When locked in conflict, they cancel out their twin promises of individual freedom and political empowerment. The multiple crises the world faces today, the waves of stateless people living in unbearable poverty and hopelessness, the escalation of political violence, ethnic cleansing, terrorism, even the deadlock over climate change, all arise out of and are intensified by liberalism and democracy's warring interactions. Their conflictual relations constitute the reef upon which liberal democracy founders. But why is their relationship so bitter? Why is access to citizenship so acrimonious and so contested? We have explored this question from a variety of different theoretical approaches last week in this. Today I want to leave theory behind and examine liberalism's conundrums from a historical perspective, focusing in particular on patterns of racial privilege and racial conflict. Since the United States is the first modern republic and the first nation dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal and endowed with their unalienable rights, it offers a good place to begin our exploration. How did the United States, the first modern liberal republic, become an exclusionary white man's democracy? How did citizenship become the white man's exclusive property? Looking forward to the conundrums of our own times, how did white nationalism first take form in the land of the free? It is a sad historical fact that throughout its history, inclusion in, exclusion from the United States body politic have been racialized. White men celebrated as the prototype of liberty-loving U.S. citizens, citizenship and whiteness constituted in opposition to slavery and blackness, African Americans seen as the white citizens defining and denigrated other. Since its founding, systems of racialized exclusion have been repeatedly enacted in the U.S. constitutional level, in court decisions, federal and state legislation, through formal and informal ghettoization, the policing of urban populations, and popular culture, including a culture of violence, and most especially in white Americans' national sense of self. How can we understand the contradictions between the United States celebration of liberalism's universal promises and its racialized practices? How did the political process involved in building a new liberal republic help constitute an exclusionary white racist republic? As we discussed on Monday, tying rights to citizenship raises a host of problems. Nation-states are, by their very nature, exclusionary. They have and need geopolitical markers to establish the us, their us, they binaries upon which their national identities and sense of order and security rest. It has long been considered one of the Republican citizens' basic rights to select who can and who cannot claim membership in the national body politic, to design a nation compatible with its citizens' aspirations. But this is precisely the point at which citizenship rights and human rights clash most bitterly. Since its founding, the United States has limited who can cross its borders. Our first Naturalization Act in 1790, while extremely welcoming to white European immigrants, refused naturalization to all of African descent. The U.S. Constitution, ratified 2 years earlier, had already whitened the United States by declaring Native Americans not citizens of the United States, but wards of the United States. It had defended slaveholders' right to reclaim escaped slaves and declared slaves themselves but 3/5 of a white person. Over the years, large numbers of white U.S. citizens disapproved of abolition, applauded the ever-harsh displacement of Native Americans, and for over 100 years accepted Jim Crow legislation. As today, they support Donald Trump's harsh immigration policies. Tying rights to citizenship and the voting public is a very risky business. There is a second, quite different perspective from which we can approach the whitening of modern liberal democracies. Democratic citizenship is an ongoing production involving complex dialogic global exchanges. No modern republic is an island unto itself. This is certainly true of nations that border the Atlantic, most especially during the age of revolution. All my lectures have focused on origins, the origin of liberal republics, of modern citizenship, and now of white nationalism. Today I will focus on dialogic exchanges among participants in 4 roughly coterminous political uprisings during the age of revolution: the U.S., the French, and the Haitian Revolutions, and the United Irishmen's rising against British imperial forces, all occurring over a 30-year period between the 1770s and the early 1800s. Participants in events in each revolution must be positioned in ongoing conversation with participants in events in the other, exposing a complex pattern of action and reaction, celebrations and fears. To give a concrete example of how these revolutions interwove, let us look at events during just 2 years, 1793 to 1794. In Paris, the revolution simultaneously expanded and turned in upon itself. As the sans-culottes took to the streets, the French king was guillotined. Radical Girondists encouraged Republican uprisings throughout Europe, sending ships to invade Ireland, for example. The terror commenced on the French island of Saint Domingue. A revolutionary black army brought French slavocracy to its knees, while thousands of fleeing slave owners spread alarms about rampaging and murderous blacks throughout the Atlantic. A year later, the French National Assembly abolished slavery in its entire empire. In the United States, citizens donned liberty caps and celebrated the fall of the Bastille. Radical Democratic Republican clubs in support of the French Revolution formed north and south, and violent uprisings spread across the West, with first the Whiskey Rebellion and then Fry's Rebellion. In Britain, William Pitt, fearing the spread of French revolutionary doctrines, hurriedly passed the Seditious Meetings Bill and the Treasonable Practices Act through Parliament. British radicals fled to France or the United States. United Irishman lodges spread throughout Ireland. Armed conflict broke out. No single one of these events can be understood in isolation from all the others. Rather, we must read them as parts of an intricate chain of action and reaction, alarm and jubilation, that transformed political thought and practice throughout the revolutionary Atlantic, gave birth to modern republics and the rights-bearing republican citizen. With the notable exception of Haiti, however, these new republics and their citizens were white, the goal of their actions expanding white power. Black empowerment and inclusion was not on their agenda. Our question today is, how did the revolutionary new republics, in spite of their universalism, become so very white? The United States, as the first modern republic, set the mold. I suggest, therefore, that to cast further light on the emergence of white nationalism, we turn to a close reading of the U.S. popular press, and that we focus in particular on two traumatic events in the young nation's history: the seizure and enslavement of 500 white U.S. sailors by North African pirates or North African states, which occurred between the mid-1780s and 1805, the very years that the new republic, U.S. Republic, took form; and the Haitian Revolution, which in 1804 gave birth to the first modern black state, the United States sister republic, Haiti. The interplay of these twin events play a key role in turning the U.S. Republic white. The newly minted American liberals' response to these twin events were far from simple. Close readings of the popular press reveal a complex pattern of ideological contradictions, denials, and effacements that destabilized the gender and racial categories around which the new Republicans structured their sense of political and social order. While an ultimate racist outcome might never have been in doubt, the United States founding generation responded in conflicting ways to the moral dilemmas slavery and black empowerment posed. And don't hesitate to stop me if you want me to go over or explain anything. I mean, we're a small enough group that we can have a conversation. We can have a dialogue. So I want now to look at the issue of white slaves and how did Americans respond to the enslavement of white people, or white men. During the very years in which the new U.S. Republic took form, the Barbary captivity narrative emerged as one of the new nation's most popular literary genres. Images of turbaned infidels enslaving and torturing brave, hard-working white Americans multiplied, playing a crucial role in the process of U.S. nation building. When the first American sailors were captured in 1784, only a year after the Treaty of Paris formally recognized the United States' independence from Britain, the United States lacked a central government. All power rested in the individual states, and the states were anything but united. In fact, when the country started to call itself the United States, they did not capitalize the phrase. It was small u, small s. They were just United States, with the emphasis on states and not on united. Rather, the states constituted an ill-fitting amalgam of bickering political entities, independent of one another and suspicious of any move towards the creation of a central government. The press's representations of the capture and barbaric treatment of hundreds of American sailors by savage Muslims dramatized for Americans their weakness on the international stage, encouraging the divided states to unite under a new constitution, design a tax structure that would replenish the empty national treasury, strengthen the Western Army, build a navy, develop a foreign diplomatic corps, and thus diplomatic and military presence abroad. This is, I think, getting back to Edwin's question yesterday, on Wednesday, where you were asking me about the spread of the United States across the continent. And I think you can take this back to the very beginning. The widely popular captivity narratives also encouraged the new republic's aggressive expansion. To the east, through its naval defeat of the Barbary states and its strident insistence on its citizens' right to trade freely around the globe. And to the west, through the savage destruction of Native American and Mexican settlements and cultures. The Barbary captivity narratives functioned on yet other critical levels of nation building. Certainly they strengthened Americans' sense of national identity and legitimacy by constructing a system of binary oppositions between the new white American citizen and a series of dangerous racialized others. Most immediately, of course, the barbaric infidels of North Africa, as they were referred to, but at only a modest remove, enslaved African Americans. Black slaves and black pirates, rhetorically fused, represented the dangers Africa and Africans posed to peace-loving white Americans. At the same time, captivity narratives permitted narrators and readers to explore the nature of citizenship and what claims citizens could make upon their new government. As race was never far from the surface in these narratives, neither were gender nor sexuality. And like race, both gender and sexuality, while apparently stabilizing factors in the construction of the new white national identity, actually destabilized it in fascinating ways. This is especially so if we read them in interaction with discussions of the Haitian Revolution and images of violated white women that fleeing planters disseminated around the Atlantic. Finally, captivity narratives raise questions of class division within the nascent American Republic. Did captivity trump class distinctions, entitle all Americans to the sympathy, or at least all white Americans, to the sympathy and support of their fellow citizens? Or did the captivity narratives reveal the depth of class divisions within the nascent white republic? Between 1784 and the early 1800s, nearly 500 American sailors were seized by North African corsairs and sold to the Algerian, Tunisian, and Tripolitan slave markets. Their fate riveted the attention of the American reading public. By the mid-1790s, a host of book-length captivity narratives began to appear, along with plays, poems, and novels, all focused on what one captive called the horrors of slavery, providing graphic descriptions of the enslavement of true-born white American citizens by tawny-skinned and barbaric Muslims who preyed on America's neutral shipping. Almost all the American ships were small and unarmed, their crews ranging from 8 to 15 men. The Barbary corsairs, in contrast, were heavily armed, manned by 300 battle-hardened Marines, screaming muskets, primed scimitars, flashing. The Muslims easily disarmed and vastly outnumbered and unarmed Americans. Horrified, yet fascinated, Americans read the horrendous details of their fellow citizens' enslavement, how they were stripped naked, held for days without food or water, beaten and confined in the dark and vermin-infested bellies of the Muslim ships. A sense of helplessness, bewilderment, and terror came over the U.S. sailors. Bemoaning our helpless fate, one captive reported, we trembled at the thought of what awaited us.
Excuse me. We are at the middle of page 4.
Indeed, it was not until they arrived in Algiers that their misery truly began. Thomas Nicholson, a young man captured on his first Atlantic voyage, described his treatment on reaching the city. We were taken in charge by the day's troops, blindfolded, pelted with clubs and stones, until we came to the palace of the day. And it was here that they came face to face with their truly abject position. We were made to throw ourselves upon the earth, Nicholson reported, and once prone to creep towards the day, licking the dust as a token of reverence and submission. The following day, those captives not chosen for castle service who had been mostly boys and young men, one narrator reported, undoubtedly adding to his readers' horror. They were stripped, the rest were stripped naked. A narrow piece of cloth was wrapped around our loins, and we were then exposed to public sale in the marketplace. Here humiliation was piled on humiliation. The barbarians, Nicholson explained, were very critical in their examination of our limbs to see if they were free from any defect. I was purchased by a young man who compelled me to lie down in the street and take his foot and place it on my neck as a token of submission and obedience to him. How low could an American citizen sink, Nicholson seems to be asking his white American readers. Grueling labor, near starvation, and brutal whippings followed the Americans' enslavement. James Stevens, a U.S. merchant assigned to report on the Americans' condition. Remember, at this point, the new republic had no diplomatic corps, so they would just, merchants who happened to be working in an area would be asked to report to the president or whoever. Sort of like Giuliani today, but not quite. The unfortunate men, Stevens reported, were attended, he described how one chain gang was being propelled through the streets of Algiers. These unfortunate men, Stevens reported, were attended by a crew of savage drivers who goaded them forward whenever they halted or happened to falter under the pressure of their burdens. The extremity of their sufferings in this laborious employment is better conceived than expressed. If anyone chanced to faint or fall down with fatigue, a common mariner and captive, John Foss, added, they generally beat them until they are able to rise again. The most tyrannical taskmaster never appeared to be in his element except when he was cruelly punishing some Christian captive. He then added, the wheelbarrow men in Philadelphia lived a genteel life compared to what we do. One wonders, is this last reference to Philadelphia's African American day laborers or day or enslaved laborers, or to its newly arrived Irish immigrants? William Ray, another captive, ended his description on a note of despair. With such usage, life became insupportable, and every night when I laid my head on the earth to sleep, I most sincerely prayed that I might never experience the horrors of another morning. Well, narrative after narrative depicted the captives in tones of pathos and victimization. When representing the new American Republic, their tone shifted dramatically to one of militant patriotism and political ardor. Far removed, quote, from the clanking of the tyrant's chain, remote from the view of slavery's pallid visage, or the sound of her grief-extorted groans, end of quote, their virtuous republic appeared to them as an unrivaled region of liberty and independence, the home of valiant Republicans who valued their freedom and rights above life itself. Narrative after narrative presented the United States as a proud, powerful, and liberty-loving republic, the enemy of tyranny and slavery, home to peace, prosperity, law, and order. What a sharp contrast to their repeated representations of North Africa as, and again I quote, as you can see, a land of hellish tortures and punishments. Its very atmosphere fraught with the most detestable depravity. A land where freedom's banners never had been unfurled since the bold Romans flourished all over the world. Here, political tyrants ruled over cringing subjects and abject slaves. A land of tyranny and enslavement, it was also a land of poverty and decay. For the narratives insisted progress and prosperity could never thrive in a land darkened by slavery. As James Stevens predicted in his History of North Africa, since the destruction of Carthage, civilization seems not an attribute of the Kingdom of Algiers or of any of the states of the Barbary. Liberal publisher and United Irishman refugee Matthew Carey's short account similarly stressed North Africa's economic backwardness, which he linked to its inhabitants' stupidity and lack of ambition. All agreed the malaise of the Dark Ages infested the Barbary states, as did unrestrained violence and economic backwardness. What a series of powerful binaries the captivity narratives constituted for readers struggling to understand what it meant to be an American in a nation less than 10 years old. Narrative after narrative contrasted American liberty